There is a moment in every person's life when they realize that words no longer work. You've explained, you've justified, you've softened your tone, you've tried to be understood, and yet you're still standing in the same emotional place, unheard, unseen, and slowly shrinking. Silence is often misunderstood. In a world that rewards noise, constant explanation, and visible struggle, choosing silence can appear as weakness. People confuse the absence of words with the absence of power, the absence of courage, the absence of feeling. But silence, when wielded intentionally, is anything but weakness. It is the final boundary of self-respect, the last line drawn between who you are and who you will allow others to treat you as. It is the quiet declaration that you will no longer negotiate your worth with those who refuse to recognize it. Think about the moments when you have felt compelled to justify yourself over and over again to someone who never truly listened. Every word, every explanation, every plea is an invisible thread connecting you to people who may never honor your presence. Silence interrupts that cycle. It is the moment when you stop bending, stop explaining, and stop offering pieces of yourself for approval that will never come. Choosing silence in these moments is an act of self-preservation. It is the recognition that your energy is finite and that your respect, once diminished, cannot be begged back with words. Silence carries weight because it is deliberate. Words can be dismissed, misinterpreted, or ignored, but silence is undeniable. When you stop speaking, you create a space that forces others to reckon with your absence. People who have taken your presence for granted are suddenly confronted with it in its void. They are reminded of the energy, patience, and care they ignored when you were present and vocal. Silence is powerful because it communicates more than words ever could. It communicates boundaries, strength, and an understanding that you value yourself more than the need to be constantly validated by others. In relationships, whether personal or professional, silence can be a shield and a statement. It signals that you are no longer willing to be drawn into cycles that drain you. It says that you recognize your worth and refuse to allow it to be diminished by misunderstanding, neglect, or disrespect. Silence is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of self-awareness. It is the moment when you acknowledge that the respect you give to yourself matters more than the temporary discomfort your absence might cause someone else. Silence is also a tool for reflection. It allows you to observe without reacting, to understand without defending, and to heal without distraction. It is in silence that you find clarity, a sense of your own strength, and a deeper connection to your values. It is in silence that you remember who you are when no one is watching, and who you choose to be when the world tries to take pieces of you for granted. To choose silence is to take back power that was slowly being eroded by others' disregard. It is not surrender. It is a final act of self-respect, a conscious refusal to diminish yourself any further. Silence says, I am enough, I am whole, and I will no longer explain myself to those who do not see my worth. In this way, silence becomes the ultimate boundary, a quiet but unyielding declaration of self-respect that speaks louder than any argument ever could. Walking away quietly is one of the most underestimated acts of power a person can take. In a world that glorifies confrontation, drama, and the loud assertion of dominance, it's easy to assume that making a scene is the only way to reclaim control. But true power rarely announces itself with noise. Real power is subtle, deliberate, and unshakable. It is the ability to remove yourself from situations that no longer serve you without causing unnecessary chaos or drawing attention to your departure. Walking away quietly shifts the balance without creating spectacle. It allows you to take control in a way that others cannot anticipate, manipulate, or respond to impulsively. When you walk away quietly, you disrupt the familiar patterns that others rely on. People who are used to your explanations, your compromises, or your presence may be confused at first. They may try to fill the void, argue for your return, or even attempt to draw you back in with false promises or manipulation. And yet, your quiet withdrawal is a form of power they cannot argue with. It does not offer a reaction to attack, a response to guilt, or an emotional outburst they can exploit. Instead, it removes the tools they had to influence you. You become untouchable, not because you fought them, but because you no longer allow them access to your energy, attention, or approval. There is a kind of elegance in leaving without drama. Walking away quietly doesn't escalate situations. It prevents them from spiraling out of control. Arguments, blame, and emotional manipulation thrive on engagement. They feed on responses, explanations, and protests. By removing yourself calmly and decisively, you deny chaos the fuel it needs to exist. This is why it is often more powerful than confrontation. Confrontation might win temporary victories, but it keeps you locked in a cycle where you are still dependent on the other person's reactions. Walking away quietly, on the other hand, gives you freedom. It gives you space. It reclaims your energy without creating collateral damage. The quiet departure also forces reflection in ways that words often cannot. People are more likely to notice what they've lost, the value of your presence, and the respect they may have taken for granted when you step away without fanfare. Unlike dramatic exits or explosive confrontations, silent withdrawal leaves room for the other person to examine their actions, their patterns, and their own behavior. It creates an unspoken accountability. It shows that your presence was never guaranteed, that your patience and energy have limits, and that your boundaries are not negotiable. Walking away quietly is also an act of self-respect. It signals to yourself and the world that your worth does not depend on anyone's recognition or validation. You do not need to fight to be acknowledged. You do not need to prove your strength. Your calm exit is a reminder that dignity cannot be forced. It must be honored. Power is reclaimed not through confrontation, but through the deliberate choice to prioritize yourself, to preserve your peace, and to refuse to be caught in cycles of chaos that diminish your energy. Quiet departure is a statement in itself. It shifts power not through noise, but through absence. It changes dynamics without destruction, asserts boundaries without aggression, and demonstrates that the strongest moves are often invisible, deliberate, and untraceable. Walking away quietly doesn't just change the situation, it changes how you carry yourself, how others see you, and how you define your own strength. People fear silence, but not for the reasons most would assume. Silence does not demand attention. In fact, it often goes unnoticed at first. It is quiet, unassuming, and understated. What it does remove, however, is access. The access people have to your energy, your emotions, your presence, and your reactions. That is what makes silence so unsettling. People are used to having a predictable rhythm with you. They know how to provoke, manipulate, or draw responses. Silence interrupts that rhythm. It closes the doors they once casually walked through, and that is a kind of power that many are not prepared to face. Access is a form of leverage. It allows others to influence your decisions, emotions, and even your sense of self-worth. When you are always responding, always explaining, always defending your choices, you are offering access, sometimes more than you realize. People fear losing that access because it means they no longer control the narrative. They no longer get to dictate how you feel, how you react, or even how you perceive yourself. Silence removes that control. It doesn't yell, it doesn't argue, it doesn't point fingers, it simply closes the door. And when the door closes, the person on the other side is left with a void they cannot fill with words, demands, or manipulation. That void is unnerving, even frightening. People fear silence because it forces reflection. When they can no longer provoke a reaction, they are left with themselves, their actions, their choices, and the consequences of how they treated you. Silence is a mirror that cannot be ignored. Unlike confrontation, which can be argued over, dismissed, or redirected, silence speaks a truth that is impossible to negotiate with. It doesn't justify, it doesn't excuse, it doesn't bend. It simply exists. And in that existence, it holds the weight of your boundaries, your self-respect, and your refusal to be diminished. Silence also reveals priorities. When you withdraw quietly, you show where your energy and focus truly lie, on yourself. People are unsettled by this because they assume that they will always have a place in your life, a space in your mind, or a reaction to their actions. Silence disrupts that assumption. It communicates that your time, attention, and presence are not entitlements. They are privileges that must be earned. And for those who have taken your access for granted, this can be profoundly destabilizing. Silence is an act of control that is invisible. Unlike loud reactions or dramatic exits, silence is subtle. It doesn't create immediate spectacle or conflict, but its effects are deeper and longer lasting. People may not notice at first that they have lost access, but over time, they realize the weight of what they no longer control. And that is precisely why silence is feared. It is a quiet form of power that cannot be bargained with, manipulated, or overcome by anger or argument. Silence is a declaration. It says, I will no longer be available on your terms. I will no longer give access to those who do not value it. People fear silence because it removes the very thing they rely on, their influence over you, while leaving your presence intact in the most undeniable way. It is a power that cannot be taken lightly, and those who encounter it often do not forget its weight. Explaining yourself repeatedly can feel like an act of patience, an attempt to be understood, or even a way to assert your value. At first, it seems necessary. You think that if you clarify your words, defend your choices, or justify your feelings enough times, someone will finally see you the way you see yourself. But the truth is harsher than it appears. Every time you over-explain, you are subtly teaching people that they do not need to listen the first time. You are training them to take your energy for granted, to assume your patience is endless, and to believe that your presence and effort are obligations rather than privileges. When someone repeatedly ignores your words, dismisses your feelings, or disregards your boundaries, your instinct may be to explain again. You want them to understand. You want them to see the truth as clearly as you do. But every additional explanation, every repeated plea, subtly shifts the dynamic. Instead of creating understanding, it reinforces a pattern. You will always be there to clarify, always willing to negotiate your worth, always ready to explain why you matter. And those who are used to this pattern start to take your effort for granted. They stop listening actively because they know you will say it again. Your energy becomes an expected resource rather than a respected contribution. This is why over-explaining can be dangerous. It erodes your authority over your own life. It teaches others that your boundaries are negotiable, your feelings are secondary, and your time is theirs to consume without consequence. You are unintentionally signaling that your attention and validation are unlimited commodities. And when people believe that, they will continue to ignore you, not out of malice, but because you have trained them that they can. Explaining yourself repeatedly also exhausts your emotional reserves. Every time you feel compelled to justify your choices, defend your perspective, or clarify your intentions, you are giving away pieces of your peace. Your words, your energy, and your patience are finite resources, and over-explaining depletes them without guaranteeing change. The person who ignores you doesn't suddenly gain insight just because you've said it one more time. What changes is your state. Frustration builds, resentment grows, and the quiet dignity you once held begins to erode under the weight of repeated justifications. The moment you stop over-explaining is the moment you reclaim your power. Silence or measured speech does not mean withdrawal from reality or evasion of responsibility. It means that you recognize your worth and refuse to negotiate it endlessly for those unwilling to meet you halfway. It is a lesson in self-respect. It communicates to others that your time, your energy, and your clarity are not theirs to exploit. You stop training people to ignore you and start teaching them to value presence, accountability, and attentiveness. Over-explaining may feel necessary in the short term, but it rarely achieves its intended effect. True respect and understanding cannot be earned through repetition alone. They are earned by boundaries, consistency, and self-respect. Walking away from the compulsion to over-explain is not abandonment, it is empowerment. It is a quiet but unmistakable way of showing that your presence, your words, and your energy are not obligations. You are no longer available to be taken for granted, and in that refusal, you reclaim control over how you are treated and how you exist in the world. Silence is not empty. It carries a weight that words often fail to deliver. Words can be ignored, twisted, or dismissed, but silence is undeniable. It has a power that confrontations cannot always achieve because it forces people to reckon with themselves rather than with your voice. When you speak, you give others the opportunity to manipulate your message, to deflect responsibility, or to shift blame. Silence, on the other hand, leaves no room for distraction. It creates a space where the absence of your explanation becomes the mirror in which others are forced to see the consequences of their actions. Accountability rarely comes easily when it is demanded. People often respond to explanations, arguments, and reminders with resistance, excuses, or deflection. They may nod, promise, or pretend to understand, but genuine reflection is rare when you are present, actively participating, or constantly justifying yourself. Silence changes that dynamic. It is the first step in withdrawing the energy that once enabled their avoidance. When you stop responding, when you stop explaining, and when you stop offering yourself as an emotional outlet, people are confronted with the reality of their behavior. They have to ask themselves, why has this person stopped speaking? What am I doing that drives them away? Walking away in silence is not passive. It is a form of pressure that demands introspection. Unlike words, which can be argued against, silence cannot be manipulated. It is the quiet statement that your presence is no longer available to be taken for granted. It communicates that respect, care, and attention are conditional and that crossing boundaries has consequences. When explanations have failed, silence becomes the boundary you could not enforce with dialogue alone. It is a lesson learned through absence rather than persuasion. Silence forces people to face their own role in the breakdown of a relationship, whether personal, professional, or even casual. It removes distractions, excuses, and justifications. It turns the focus inward, where real accountability lives. In this way, silence is not cruel, it is precise. It is a tool that shifts the responsibility of reflection from the one who has been wronged to the one who caused the wrong. And in that shift, a deeper understanding emerges, often more lasting and transformative than anything words could achieve. There is also an emotional economy to consider. Every explanation given, every argument made, every attempt to clarify takes energy, patience, and emotional labor. When that labor is unreciprocated or ignored, it reinforces a cycle of disrespect. Silence cuts that cycle. It is a conscious refusal to expend energy where it is not valued. By stepping back, you protect yourself while simultaneously creating the conditions for others to confront their behavior honestly. It is a powerful, subtle act of influence because it does not demand attention. It demands integrity. Silence forces accountability because it removes the safety net of distraction. It exposes the truth of a situation in a way that words cannot. While words can be misinterpreted, avoided, or dismissed, silence is definitive. It declares that you will no longer participate in patterns that disrespect, undervalue, or exploit you. It communicates that actions have consequences and that respect is not automatic. Where dialogue has failed, silence works quietly but relentlessly, demanding that responsibility be recognized and ultimately earned. Emotional detachment is one of the hardest choices a person can make, and yet it is often more painful than confrontation. Confrontation has noise, chaos, and visible release. There is anger, there are words exchanged, and there is at least the illusion of resolution. When you confront someone, the emotions are out in the open. You feel hurt, yes, but you also feel heard. Even if the other person refuses to change, there is a tangible acknowledgement that something is wrong, and that acknowledgement, however small, can bring a strange kind of relief. Emotional detachment, however, carries no such immediate relief. It is quiet, it is subtle, and it is profoundly isolating. Detachment forces you to step away from a person or situation without drama, without argument, and without explanation. You withhold your reactions, your validations, your energy. You stop engaging, stop negotiating, and stop participating in the cycle that once consumed you. At first glance, it seems like freedom, but the reality is more complicated. Emotional detachment requires watching without reacting, caring without responding, and existing without being able to intervene. Your heart still feels, your mind still remembers, but your hands and your voice no longer act. You are left carrying the weight of unspoken disappointment, unmet expectations, and unreturned care. In confrontation, pain is externalized. Words, tears, and anger act as a release valve for frustration, grief, and hurt. But emotional detachment internalizes everything. The person who detaches quietly bears the burden alone. You experience loss without closure, absence without explanation, and disappointment without the catharsis that confrontation often provides. The silence of detachment amplifies reflection, self-doubt, and sometimes guilt. It forces you to ask questions repeatedly. Am I justified in stepping away? Will they ever understand? Did I fail by letting go quietly? The answers rarely come easily, and the process can feel lonelier than any argument. Yet this is also where its power lies. Emotional detachment is not a sign of weakness. It is a conscious decision to protect yourself from the repetitive patterns of harm that confrontation cannot fix. Sometimes no amount of argument, negotiation, or persuasion can change a person's behavior. In those moments, detachment is not only necessary, it is the strongest response. It hurts precisely because it matters. It hurts because it requires you to care enough to recognize what is no longer healthy for you and then have the courage to step back without expecting acknowledgement, apology, or understanding. The quiet pain of detachment teaches resilience in ways confrontation cannot. It forces you to face your own needs, values, and boundaries. It demands that you confront your own dependency on someone's presence or approval. It reminds you that love, loyalty, and effort are not obligations. They are choices. And when you choose detachment, you reclaim control of your energy, your peace, and your self-respect. Emotional detachment hurts more than confrontation because it is deeply intimate and intensely personal. It strips away illusions, removes comfort, and forces introspection. You walk away without a battle, yet the echoes of what could have been, the absence of acknowledgement, and the quietness of your withdrawal weigh heavily. And while it may be the most painful, it is also the most transformative. Detachment does not demand recognition from others. It demands recognition from yourself. It forces you to honor your worth in silence. And in that quiet honor lies a power that confrontation alone can never achieve. Walking away in silence is not just a choice, it is an act of self-preservation. In a world that constantly demands our attention, energy, and emotional labor, choosing to leave quietly is one of the most radical forms of protection we can give ourselves. When someone repeatedly disrespects, manipulates, or drains us, continuing to engage only puts our nervous system at risk. Our minds become restless, our bodies tense, and our hearts heavy as we expend energy trying to be heard, understood, or valued. Walking away in silence halts that drain. It allows the body, mind, and soul to reclaim the space and peace that were gradually stolen through constant engagement. The nervous system thrives on safety and predictability. When we are caught in cycles of conflict, emotional manipulation, or repeated disappointment, our nervous system reacts as if we are under threat. Elevated stress, anxiety, sleeplessness, and overthinking become constant companions. Confrontation can sometimes temporarily release tension, but it often prolongs it as the same patterns repeat. Silence, in contrast, creates a boundary that is immediate and effective. By stepping away, we remove ourselves from harmful stimuli without fueling further chaos. We stop the overactivation of stress responses, allowing our nervous system to stabilize. Walking away quietly is a protective act that signals to our own body and mind, enough. I am prioritizing myself. I will no longer absorb harm that I do not deserve. Dignity is another invisible but powerful aspect preserved by silent departure. When we engage repeatedly in arguments, explanations, or justifications, we risk diminishing ourselves in the eyes of others and even in our own perception. Pleading to be understood or accepted can chip away at the quiet confidence that we all carry within. Walking away in silence, however, is an assertion of worth that requires no validation. It communicates that our presence is not negotiable, our respect is not for sale, and our boundaries are not optional. Silence protects dignity because it prevents us from lowering ourselves to seek approval from those unwilling to offer it freely. Walking away in silence is a reclamation of autonomy. It is a reminder that we are not obligated to participate in cycles of disrespect or emotional drain. It does not matter how much someone questions, pressures, or manipulates. It is a conscious refusal to surrender the control of our peace to another person. Silence becomes a shield, a sanctuary, and a statement all at once. It is the quietest yet most powerful form of empowerment because it relies on your absence to teach respect rather than on words to demand it. Silence also protects our mental clarity. When we disengage without dramatics, we allow ourselves space to process, reflect, and heal. Without constant noise, argument, or expectation, we can reconnect with our intuition, our desires, and our priorities. Walking away in silence is a profound act of self-care. It signals that we value our emotional equilibrium over external validation, that our time and energy are precious, and that we will not compromise either for someone who refuses to honor our humanity. In the end, walking away in silence is both defensive and declarative. It protects the nervous system from harm, preserves dignity from erosion, and asserts boundaries without confrontation. It is a quiet power, a shield, and a statement all at once, showing that some departures are not losses. They are acts of self-respect, healing, and unwavering strength. Not everyone deserves closure. It is a truth that many of us resist because we are conditioned to believe that explanations, apologies, or final conversations are necessary for healing. We think that clarity will soothe the wounds, that understanding will fix the hurt, and that closure is a courtesy owed to both parties. But the reality is far more complex. Some people do not deserve closure because their presence in our lives was never rooted in accountability, respect, or genuine care. They were never invested in reciprocity. They only took, demanded, or manipulated. In these cases, seeking closure is not a step toward healing. It is a risk of reopening old wounds and granting significance to those who never valued it in the first place. Distance, in contrast, is a far more powerful form of resolution. It is a statement that your peace, your energy, and your boundaries are not negotiable. By choosing distance over closure, you are asserting that your emotional well-being is more important than a conversation that may never be honest, sincere, or productive. Distance does not require explanation, argument, or validation. It simply exists. It is a quiet boundary that communicates volumes, that you will no longer participate in dynamics that drain, demean, or diminish you, and that your life will no longer orbit people who refuse to meet you halfway. Seeking closure with someone undeserving can often backfire. It can open the door for manipulation, false apologies, or empty promises. It can leave you vulnerable to emotional manipulation as you may hope for acknowledgement or change that will never come. In these situations, closure becomes a trap, a means for someone else to continue exerting influence over your emotions. Distance, however, removes that leverage. It is a protective act that safeguards your heart and mind from the chaos of repeated disappointment. Walking away without seeking justification is not cruelty, it is wisdom. It recognizes that some people are incapable of accountability, and that trying to force understanding where there is none only prolongs suffering. Distance also allows for clarity and growth. It creates space for reflection, self-assessment, and healing. Without the noise of explanations, defenses, or repeated interactions, you are free to evaluate your own patterns, understand your own needs, and reclaim your power. You learn that your value is not tied to someone else's recognition, that your peace is not dependent on their participation, and that your boundaries are not negotiable. In this way, distance is not avoidance. It is deliberate protection. It teaches you to honor yourself in the absence of acknowledgement from others. Distance reframes the way you approach relationships. It instills discernment, teaching that not everyone is entitled to a piece of your story, your emotions, or your energy. Some people were never meant to remain in your life, and the act of allowing them to leave without explanation honors both your dignity and your growth. It is a reminder that closure is not always about them. It is about you, your peace, and your ability to move forward without lingering attachment to what was never healthy. Choosing distance over closure is a declaration that your life, your energy, and your self-respect are not negotiable. Some people deserve understanding, accountability, and resolution, but others simply deserve to be left behind in silence as you continue to protect, honor, and prioritize yourself. Distance becomes both a boundary and a lesson, quietly teaching that the most important closure we ever need is the one we give ourselves. In the end, the message of this speech is clear. The most powerful moves are often silent, deliberate, and rooted in self-respect. Walking away, detaching, and holding your boundaries are not signs of weakness. They are acts of strength. Silence is not emptiness. It is presence in its purest form. It forces reflection where words fail, protects your energy where confrontation cannot, and preserves your dignity in a world that often seeks to diminish it. Not everyone deserves explanation, closure, or justification. Some people only deserve distance, and choosing that distance is an act of profound courage. When you embrace silence, you reclaim your power. When you detach with intention, you honor yourself. When you walk away quietly, you shift the balance of any situation without creating chaos. Each of these choices sends a message, not to punish, but to preserve, not to manipulate, but to protect. Your peace, your boundaries, and your self-worth are yours alone to safeguard. And in that quiet reclamation of your life, you demonstrate a truth that cannot be argued with. The strongest, most dangerous, and most transformative moves often come without words, without explanation, and without fanfare. Choosing silence, walking away, and prioritizing yourself is not easy. It carries pain, reflection, and sometimes grief. But it is necessary, because in protecting your energy, preserving your dignity, and holding your boundaries, you are no longer allowing the world or the people in it to dictate your worth. You are no longer negotiating with those unwilling to respect you. And that, ultimately, is the greatest power any of us can wield. The power to walk away quietly, to remain intact, and to step fully into the life, the peace, and the respect that you truly deserve.